Hello friends, it's your girl Alina back for another video, and in this one we'll be diving into the 5 things you need to know all around this upcoming full moon and harvest moon in the intuitive water sign of Pisces. In this video we'll be diving into why Uranus will be the star of the show of this full moon, really the second star, because we're going to be seeing a big bright full moon. We'll also talk about why this lunation will bring in lowered inhibitions, feeling a calling or less of a fear around stepping out of our comfort zone, leaning into our intuitive inklings more so than full-on practicality or limiting beliefs. So with that said, let's dive in. First up, why is this moon important? As mentioned before, the name harvest moon is given to the last full moon of the summer season that is closest in proximity to the autumnal equinox. And as many of y'all already know, full moons are seen as a strong culmination point where we see heightened energy, heightened emotions, and intuitive abilities as we see them rise, similar to the tides at the time of a full moon. Now, one of the reasons why this is because the full moon is midway through the lunar cycle, where we see the light on the moon has built to its peak, resulting in what I like to call a cosmic spotlight, illuminating what has and hasn't been working for us midway through the lunar cycle. Now, this is why you see many people doing full moon rituals, where they write out what has and hasn't been working for them, reflect on things like our emotions, our inner world, because that's really what the moon primarily impacts, and seeing what we can release to lighten our journey, lighten the load midway through it. And as with all full moons, they occur when we see an opposition aspect between the moon and sun. So we see the moon in the sign of Pisces, this fluid, intuitive, spiritual, imaginative sign, really impacting our inner world, having this opposition really bringing in this dualistic nature with the sun, which is currently in Virgo, this grounded earth sign of practicality, organization, focusing more on the physical health versus the spiritual health, right? And it is during all full moons that we are asked to strike a balance between the dualities of the two, where we're not necessarily asked to pick a side, to lean more towards practicality, structure, organization, and leaning more into that, or leaning too on the side of being overly spiritual or imaginative to the point that we don't have our feet on the ground, right? And so during this full moon, we are being asked to strike a balance between the two. Something I feel called to remind y'all about is that opposition aspects in astrology, though they can provide friction between the astral bodies involved and the areas of our lives that those astral bodies might impact depending on what signs they are in, like we see with the sun and moon right now, that friction can often be a catalyst for action. That's one of the reasons why during full moons, you might notice that we might feel more energized, called to be out and about. You also, on the flip side, might see more arguments or things coming up from our inner world to the surface, right? As the full moon raises those emotions and intuitive feelings to bring them, to express them. This can also spark action in the realms of finding balance within that duality. So during this time, it will be very fruitful to really explore and nurture our spiritual and imaginative sides while still maintaining our day-to-day practical lives and not leaning one more so than the other. Because especially in our world where we lean more so into logical structured lives and more so away from spirituality, for some of us, not all, right? If you're watching this, you probably lean a little bit more in the spiritual realm. What can happen is a lot of people can be like, this is who I am, this is how things are, and that's it, period, right? And the flip side to that, sometimes that's very beneficial, right? Because when we know what we want, who we are, and all these things, we can build structures and routines around that to best nurture and help ourselves, right? But the flip side to that can be that sometimes we close ourselves off from the possibilities that are all around, right? That can show up as flash judgments of others or situations before learning what is on the other side of that, or actually asking questions. And alternatively, with the imaginative side, the more spiritual side, we might also just be fully having our head in the clouds, right? Fully being too tied to emotional responses and triggers, and not actually becoming more pragmatic and practical about it and asking, well, where do those emotional triggers stem from, right? How can I actually build structure towards better understanding them? And so all in all, we are being asked to strike that balance. Next up, let's dive into the transits surrounding this harvest moon. First up, the day before the harvest moon, on September 9th, we see Mercury, the planet of intellect, communication, and travel, going retrograde in the sign of Libra and Virgo all the way until October 2nd. Now, when in retrograde, Mercury's overarching lesson for us, and it's asking of us, is for us to slow down and bring more intentionality into the realms of our lives that it impacts, specifically our connections, our communication, things that of the air, so our thinking patterns, the internet, electricity. This is one of the reasons why we see a lot of recommendations during Mercury retrogrades to, be careful with your electronics, back things up. While all of these things are great recommendations, it's important to remember to not let a lot of that fear mongering that I feel like you see a lot of articles and people bring up take over your life. It's really all about slowing down. There can be a heightened chance that we can have hiccups in these realms if we are not bringing intentionality into it. But what's great about astrology is that, and these forecasts, is that they are just that. They are a forecast, similar to the weather, right? Just because it might rain on a certain day does not mean that you'll necessarily get wet, right? You might decide to stay in that day. You might decide to wear some boots and an umbrella. And so similar in astrology, when we heighten our awareness of the nature of a Mercury retrograde or some of the many other retrogrades that are currently happening at the start of September, when we understand them, we can understand how to better navigate them. We can heighten our self-awareness so that we are less likely to experience these mishaps. Now, we specifically Mercury starting its retrograde in the more social air sign of Libra and then going into the more practical earth sign of Virgo. So starting off with this retrograde, we'll likely see themes within the realms of Libra, that being relative to relationships and contracts. So we can likely see heightened chances of things like exes, whether that be in relationships, acquaintances, kind of circling back, having their own retrograde, kind of reversing their path back to us, or vice versa. We might feel called to maybe reconnect with people, resolve things. Also relative to Libra energy and really Mercury on its own, we can likely see heightened potential for miscommunication. So it'll be important to, in emails, when talking to people, first off, giving people the benefit of the doubt, right? Asking clarifying questions to be clear about what they might have come across as, or also being sure to communicate extra clearly, double checking spell checks. And when it comes to exes and things circling around, oftentimes that is a lesson coming back to see if you have learned it. And so for some, when I say that, you might think, oh, it's an ex. That means that if I talk to them or I see them again, I know to set my boundary and say no, right? But there also is the potential that for past relationships, friendships, acquaintances, business, things like that, if we do see them coming back, that could also be interpreted as an opportunity to learn other lessons. Maybe that might be that we learn, oh my gosh, I didn't fully understand how you were coming across before and now I do. Or it could be, oh, I didn't understand this before and now I understand the fuller context to what happened, right? So being open-minded to the idea that there are so many different sides to different situations, right? And being open-minded to that. Sometimes that does involve setting boundaries, but just keep it in mind. All in all, to wrap up this Mercury retrograde kind of breakdown, just want to remind y'all that it's all about slowing down and bringing intentionality into the realms of our lives that the retrograded planet might be impacting. Next up, we see the moon sextiling Uranus. Now, when we see a sextile aspect between two astral bodies, it often means that there is more easy flowing ideas and opportunities between the realms of our lives that those astral bodies will impact. So when we see a transit like this, we can often experience a heightened likelihood of chance encounters and lucky events or occurrences. We can often feel more open to leaving our comfort zone and listening more so to our intuition than maybe our subconscious or our ego, that oftentimes it's rooted in wanting to protect us, but not always rooted in the truth. And I'll elaborate on that. And this is because we see the moon, this astral body that impacts our inner world, our intuition, our emotions, how we process things, how we are kind of like in private, having this easy flowing, fluid energy, potentially even lucky energy with Uranus, the planet of awakening, change, and freedom. So we're seeing our inner worlds, our inner psyche, having this freeing feeling that we get thanks to Uranus. So So along with the pre-existing energizing power that we experience every month from a full moon, we also get this energizing, impact from this transit between the moon and Uranus, where we might feel, or we might notice others feeling more open and more free, less scared to step out of our comfort zone and take leaps of faith. Next up, we see the sun trining also with Uranus. Now, a trine aspect specifically indicates more easy flowing and very lucky energy between the astral bodies involved. So when we see a transit like this, very similar to the moon sextiling Uranus, we can often feel more adventurous, more experimental, and more open-minded. More specifically, we can often feel a heightened sense of connection to our intuition. And going back to the fact that this is a full moon in the sign of Pisces, Pisces is the pinnacle sign of our intuitive, imaginative, and spiritual abilities. We will definitely feel more inclined and more open-minded to supporting and listening to our intuitive callings. And oftentimes in life, our initial calling, our initial urge, our initial longing is our intuitive calling. That is our intuition. And then when we have maybe our limiting beliefs, our fears, what about this? Wait, how are they going to judge me? That's more of the egoic subconscious coming in, oftentimes rooted in wanting to protect us, because our subconscious is really rooted in, an accumulation of what we've heard and been exposed to all of our lives, versus our intuitive calling towards something. There is a stronger support within our intuitive side to step forward into that. We also see, even if you don't feel called to do anything or step out of your comfort zone or any of that, during this time, these types of transits really help us relative to adapting to change. So even if you're doing all the same things, if you notice that there has been change in your life during this full moon and around this time, thanks to these transits, we might feel more open to being adaptable and to trying new things in the face of change. And finally, we see Saturn squaring off with Uranus. So again, Uranus is kind of like the star of the show during this full moon. Now, when we see a square aspect in astrology, it can often increase the chances of challenges or friction between the astral bodies involved and the aspects of our world or our lives that it impacts. So when we see a transit like this, it can often increase the likelihood of feeling restricted or experiencing restrictive change in our lives. But what's really good is that relative to this transit, we see so many other supportive transits, including the full moon, including, this trine and sextile with Uranus between our inner and outer world, that being the moon and sun, which will increase our likelihood to be adaptable to any potential restrictions that might come about. Another perspective of this type of transit is that between Saturn, this planet that's all about responsibility, growing up, maturity, and literal restriction, having this friction with Uranus, this planet of freedom and change and waking up, having an awakening, is that this transit can also highlight what has already been limiting us. And through highlighting it can actually help us to better dismantle and deconstruct those things. What is and isn't conducive to me just existing more intuitively and freely? What is and isn't conducive to me kind of leaning into the more Pisces themes of this full moon? Like, when was the last time that you had an expectation of something and you realized, oh, that was me. I had a limiting belief about myself or about others. I had a preconceived notion or a prejudice about a situation and I was proven wrong. How does that show up? Because that's the type of way that this type of transit can manifest for us. Ways to align with this energy. First up, I'm gonna sound redundant, but I'll say it again. Lean into your intuition. Journal, write about when was the last time that we felt a strong calling towards something? When was the last time that you were like, I have a good feeling about this? Or, I don't have a very good feeling about this. When were you right and when were you wrong? Where do these beliefs, whether they're limiting or freeing beliefs, come from? Ooh, this is a big theme. I feel like this is a big theme for this full moon for a lot of people, maybe not all. And I love this saying. It's, don't tell yourself no before they do. Why tell yourself no before they do? And it's really this saying that highlights, sometimes we will tell ourselves no about a situation, whether it's going for what we want, asking for something, speaking our boundaries, speaking how we feel about something, speaking up for ourselves, or going for something. And sometimes we'll say, no, don't do it. Don't do it because they're gonna do X, Y, and Z, or because it's gonna turn out X, Y, and Z. Don't tell yourself no before someone else does. Let them tell you no. And sometimes that no isn't even a no, it's a not yet. So learning and leaning into that theme during this time can be very powerful. And finally, going back to the core of these full moon themes, exploring what it looks like to balance your more spiritual and imaginative side with your more pragmatic and practical, more grounded side. All right, y'all, let's go ahead and dive into these full moon writing prompts. What I'll do is I will project the questions up on the screen. I invite you to pause the video, write them out, and when you're done, we'll come back. Is there anything you're ready to release during this full moon? This can look like limiting beliefs, habits, patterns, people, or environments that no longer serve you. What does it look like for you to move past fear in an area of life where you've felt it strongly? How could you find support, if so? When was the last time you were proven wrong about a limiting belief, expectation, or judgment about a situation? All right, y'all, I hope you enjoyed those writing prompts. I invite you to comment if anything came up for you that you feel, called to share or comfortable with sharing in the comment section. I'd love to read them and hear from you. And I'll go ahead and answer one or two of these writing prompts to kind of catch up with y'all and just spark some conversation. Okay, so in terms of me being proven wrong about a limiting belief or judgment that I had on a situation, I actually want to tell y'all about my YouTube channel. I'll do like kind of a long story short situation, but the history of this channel, it really started with me feeling this deep like calling and intuitive just inkling to start a channel. And this was a few years ago, and I won't say the year, maybe you can go back and see the earliest videos, but I'll just say this, it was during a time before people thought that you could create a career online. It was right around the time that there were a few really big people, but it wasn't considered, I don't know, just like a kind of niche or corner that people could etch out for themselves. But I still felt the calling, And I spent literally a year. Randomly, whenever I would talk to people, I'd bring up like, oh, I kind of want to start a YouTube channel. And I was constantly asking everyone whether or not I should start a channel. And I got a lot of mixed reactions, mixed views about that, with a lot of them being like, no, girl, like that sounds cool and everything, but like chill, you know what I mean? And that was perfectly okay, right? And in retrospect, I understand the full context of that, in that one, they didn't know the industry that I knew very well. I was not asking people who have gone where I would like to go, so they didn't have that understanding of the general online e-com industry. But specifically, long story short, I ended up starting the channel, right? I ended up being successful in it. It took me a while to do, but I ended up doing it. And I considered that an example of a perception that I had of the situation, which was so many limiting beliefs of like, people are gonna judge me. My old high school friends are gonna see that I'm trying to be like an online person. All of these things that I was fearful of, the judgment of others, failure, looking dumb. And that was the more egoic, subconscious aspect of me trying to protect myself, right? But it took me asking people for a year to finally be like, why am I asking everyone else? I'm constantly looking for confirmation outside of myself when this whole time deep down, I've known that I want to do this. I know that I could be good at this. And I started it, and I ended up proving myself wrong about that judgment because, it's such a universal feeling, stepping out into the unknown, stepping out on faith based off of your intuitive, deep-rooted understanding of who you are and what you're capable of, and having that distinction between the two. When we can find that clarity, that is where the magic can really happen. All right, y'all, if you made it to the end of this video, I invite you to comment 3 fall leaf emojis. Say hello, baby. Oh, she's like, no, thank you. And if you don't want to comment that, maybe comment if anything came up for you, any of the stories that I shared, answering one of the writing prompts if that is relatable to you, or maybe if you have a different perspective, I'd love to hear about it. But with all of that said, I will leave you with my favorite quote. Oh, one more thing. A lot of y'all have been asking when the 2023 line for the Auralign planner line will be coming out. All I will say is to be on the lookout closer to the month of October. That's all I'll say. I will also say all of the comments and feedback that y'all have given me on this planner, I can confidently tell you I've listened and implemented and innovated, and I am just elated for y'all to enjoy it all year round when they come out. But anyway, I digress. With all of that said, I will leave you with my favorite quote, and that is, be gentle with yourself, because life is about the journey, not the destination. All right, peace.